same questions again, but as related to the 30mm fantasy line, because after you had sculpted so many elves and dwarves and goblins over the years, you did sort of refine into some very specific patterns for the stuff that you've done in the last 20 years.
With anything, you make one and then you think, oh, I could have done that better, and then you make another one and you think, oh yeah, I still could have made that a little better by doing something different.
So
at least that's the way I am.
Yeah. Meter line. If you'd like to talk about what inspired you to start sculpting the line.
Well, I just didn't like the way anybody else depicted Tolkien's universe. I thought they all got it wrong, and I wanted to do my own version of it. And when they made the movies and Games Workshop got the license to make the figures, at first they went much more proportional, I think, to try and sell the idea, because I think the movie people probably didn't like the idea of the caricatures type figures that they normally made. So
on the 30mm line, you did the 30mm to because you thought it would mesh with what was being done in the early 2000s by the Perrys, right?
Right. Well, just specifically for that line, they never did it for anything else. But
yeah,
and they didn't stick to it. Either they or whoever they got doing the line afterwards started making the figures really big and chunky again after the first 20 or so.
Yeah, I don't know how long they stuck with. I know they did some stuff, but
yeah, only the first run, but they, I guess, like I said, they probably needed to do them that way to get them past the approval, and then they went back to their old style.
So I've had this asked to me a couple times. What made you decide to bring dwarves into the 30mm line now? Was it?
I had some of them made already.
Oh, yeah?
I just never pressed them, and I just added more. That's all.
Cool. And any particular inspirations for their armor or the designs? I know there's a runic shape on one of the crossbowmen's helmet that I had meant to ask you about. I don't have a copy of it with me.
Yeah, they're just Norse runes. I just didn't write them. I didn't have any specific meaning or significance. Just the ones that were easy to sculpt.
Gotcha.
And looked like runes, didn't look like something else. I mean, a lot of runes look like a box, you know, a box in his head.
Now you are a fan of Tolkien's works.
I actually haven't read them since I was 20.
Yeah. Some of the people who are, though, they tend to focus on a particular, I think they refer to it as like an age. Is there one of those time periods within his works that you see this stuff as representing more than another one?
Well, I didn't read any of the later ones done from his notes. The only works by Tolkien I've read are Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Okay. So they would be that time period.
Right. I read The Hobbit. I was about 10, 11, 12. Okay. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was about 13 or 14.
Okay. Do you have a preference between the two?
Well, I like The Hobbit because it's a complete, story in itself. It's like you can't talk about a preference. It's like the difference between I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It could take me a while, but it's The Hobbit's like a little gem, and The Lord of the Rings is like this sprawling. It's like the Sistine Chapel ceiling, it goes every direction, there's always something new to look at, and it interrelates with the other parts and things. The Hobbit's a much more conventional story, and the Lord of the Rings was Tolkien trying to build a mythology, so it's they're not really comparable. It's like saying, which do you like better, bicycles or cars?
I got you. Ask you the same questions again, but as related to the 30mm fantasy line, because after you had sculpted so many elves and dwarves and goblins over the years, you did sort of refine into some very specific patterns for the stuff that you've done in the last 20 years.
With anything, you make one and then you think, oh, I could have done that better, and then you make another one and you think, oh yeah, I still could have made that a little better by doing something different.
So
at least that's the way I am.
Yeah. I want to ask again about for the Wood Elf nobles that you had done. You chose themes for them. There was the oak, water lily, and hawthorn. Right. And if you'd like to share with everybody what that is, because I don't think everyone is aware of the significance.
Well, I chose oak, hawthorn, and ash because they're all sacred trees in kind of druidic oak. Hawthorn is a magical tree or bush that occurs in fairy tales and things. Whenever you find like a leprechaun, he's living under a hawthorn tree. Ash again is mentioned in like Norse mythology as, I think actually Yggdrasil, the tree thing is an ash tree, but or maybe but it's again mentioned and things like that. That's why a book that's not read much, but if you happen across a copy of it, I recommend it, is Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the Jungle Book, wrote a similar series for children that was supposed to be instructive about English history. And the premise sounds so twee and silly, when I'm going to say it, that you would think it's not worth reading, but the stories are actually great, because Kipling's a great writer. But apparently these two children, they're like 10 or 11 years old, brother and sister, they perform the song from Shakespeare's Fairy Queen 3 times perfectly in a fairy circle on Midsummer's Eve. So
by accident or intentionally?
By accident.
Okay.
They break the hills, and so they summon all the fairy folk, but the only one that's left in England by that time, this is Edwardian children, is Puck. He calls himself Robin Goodfellow, like that. But he then proceeds to summon characters from England's past who tell their life stories to the children. And it's basically history instruction in the form of a story.
Yeah,
but it has wonderful little touches in it. Like at one point, they call a Roman centurion to tell about his story in England. And he at one point he mentions a catapult. And of course, the English call what we call a slingshot a catapult with rubber, things in a catch. And the boy pulls one out of his pocket and gives it to him, and he says, "Like this?" And the centurion looks at it and goes, "No, I'm talking about a war machine, but what beast yields this marvelous stretching leather?"
What was the book called?
Pook of Puck's Hill.
Pook of Puck's Hill.
And there was a sequel called Rewards and Fairies. Anyway, Puck's song is by oak, ash, and thorn. That's how old England was born. Blah blah blah. Nice. A silly little chant for some. That's actually where he originally published his poem. If was one of the. He'll have a story and then he'd have a poem, and then he'd have a story. Okay. That's where the original if things. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, it gets reprinted a lot. But that's where it was first published. Was in.
That's interesting. So a lot of people watching this now have homework. They've got to go track down a book.
Yeah. Well, like I said, they're not fantasy particularly. Although there's one story which is kind of odd. It's strange. It's a Norman knight who is abducted by Norsemen and taken down to Africa, and he meets up with gorillas, which he thinks are demons, and, things like that.
Huh. Very interesting. Now
chimpanzees, maybe. I don't know if they're gorillas or chimpanzees.
For your Wood Elves, when you did the scouts specifically and the huntsmen with the hounds,
right?
You had very specific designs on their capes, right?
Oh yeah, I was thinking, you want to give them a cape because it can get cold and there's lots of reason to have one. But if you've ever walked through the woods, you know that a cloak is not it would catch in everything. So I thought, what if you had a cloak could be just as useful for wrapping yourself in, to just to be like a ghillie suit so you could hide, as well as for keeping you warm. If it was gathered at the bottom and at the top. I call them pea pod cloaks. And I basically invented this along with the 5-pointed tent in the Arthurian line. I just never put a 5-pointed tent. But I just wanted, pentagram, something for the evil guy's tent. So it's basically gathered at the bottom and gathered at the top. It probably still wouldn't be practical for walking through the woods, but I thought it was a good idea anyway. So.
It definitely makes them stand out from the other figures. And then for the High Elves, you went a little different from the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves weren't necessarily themed on the basic soldiers, right? They were just different types of armor.
Yeah, more or less. But the males always wear leaves or something like that, some other woodland themed thing, and the women elves, wood elves, always wear flowers or fruits or nuts.
Nice.
Something. Actually, I think I put nuts on the crown of the wood elf wingtip, but like little acorns.
And
or rowan berries.
I haven't heard that phrase in a while. So with the High Elves, you chose to basically do a theme for each of the soldiers, right? There was for the archers, there was this starburst,
Right.
comet, and moon.
I wanted to use, for the elves, use things from the woods. For the high elves, the sky. Birds, astronomical features of various kinds. Abstract designs that recall such features. So, you know, I did the one that was the owl, and I used bird feathers and themes in other ones, and basically just anything to do with the sky. If I got around to doing sea elves, I would use things from the sea. I did actually put on that one elf hero. I'm not really terribly pleased with the way it came out, but sometimes it looks okay from different angles. I put a kind of a nautilus shell helmet on it.
The guy with the arm out like this.
Right.
Yeah, I picked up on that. It makes him stand out among the others. It does make him look like a real character, which is good. The Wood Elves were stylized off things in the woods, obviously. The High Elves off the celestial things and birds as well. And you had told me with the new batch of elves you've done that we're releasing with this Kickstarter, that you made those as sort of like a bridge between the two.
Right. They could be interpreted either way. They just have abstract armor on. You know.
So I think those are the things about the 30 millimeter elves that's jumped out to me. Is there anything else about how you did those that people might not know?
I guess there's a lot of things they wouldn't know, but things that are interesting that you might want to know. I can't think of anything offhand. I told you my idea of elves is that they're magical, but strength is not one of their attributes. So I tend to equip elves with things that don't require great strength to use, except for bows, and things like spears and swords. I wouldn't normally. I'm not normally predisposed unless I'm specifically asked to give an elf a thing like an axe or a club or something like that. That doesn't seem very elvish to me. But.
Would halberds fall within that or not? I mean, because
you know how you're supposed to use a halberd? It's kind of funny because I had a friend who was in SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism, and they would fight with halberds. And I went to watch them once. They were at some kind of a meet where there's something else going on, and they're using the halberd like a quarterstaff. But that is one way you can use it. Obviously, you can use it lots of different ways. But what made it distinguished from a quarterstaff or from a short pike or something like that is the fact that it was for getting through very heavy armor. And the way you did it was you used it like a poleaxe. You didn't grab it in the middle. You put both hands on the end of it, and you got 10 feet of pole, and there's an axe head at the end, and you swing it through a great big arc. And when you bring it down on somebody, I don't care how much armor they have, it's going to give.
Yeah.
There was a case of a Swiss halberdier at a battle. I remember reading an account of it where he was being charged by a cavalryman, and he knew he couldn't get out of the way, so he swung his axe about 3 feet off his halberd about 3 feet off the ground and cut off both the horse's front legs. And so it just went clomp in front of him.
So, in your opinion, would the halberd would the elves have the strength to use it regularly or not?
Well, like I said, it's a strength weapon. I don't.
Okay.
I mean, the elves are imaginary, so you can imagine them to have anything they want. You want.
Gotcha.
That's just the way I think of it, as not using a weapon like that. With a spear, you can use your body weight. You can just charge into somebody and poke them with it. You don't need to be strong to use a spear particularly. You would if you were going to stand there and hammer away at somebody, but if you're just going to charge and try and push them out of the way. with a relatively short spear. It wouldn't take that much strength. And a bow can be geared to your strength. You know, it's like I was talking about with that. I should remember the name of that story, where you know, it was this guy who got caught up in with a troop of elves and they were fighting. And when he went over the battlefield, he found that these armored guys who'd been attacking them, creatures, they were basically goblins. They called them something else in the story. That most of them had shot through the eye, because that's how accurate they were. You don't have to have a lot of force behind your arrow. You just shoot somebody and you're hitting an eyeball. Right.
Okay, so I think that gives plenty of information on the elves. Now for the goblins, for the 30 millimeter line, I know there was something you had written up online several years ago, talking about how you had sort of envisioned these goblins is that they, I think there might have been something about how they got bigger as they got older, but also that they accumulated layers of fat around their head. Does that sound?
Oh yeah, you give them big flabby head, neck things, and you basically keep the skull the same size, but it's like an orangutan. You know, you look at a young orangutan, it's got after that it's got this big, like looks like a goiter all over his head. Gee, I thought that would be a good feature to give them a distinctive look for.
Gotcha. So out of curiosity, would that mean that the goblins you had sculpted to be the archers, which are significantly smaller than the ones you put as the warriors, would they grow into the warriors, or would they possibly be some other offshoot of...
That's the way I think of it, is if they lived long enough and didn't get eaten by another goblin, they would grow into the warriors.
Okay. So that then obviously
I expect cannibalism is probably a big part of their culture.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then, obviously, the character figures most likely would be bigger than the...
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if you survive long enough to get in charge or get a good job, like being a shaman or something, then you know, you're going to be pretty big by that time.
Gotcha.
Just keep growing like trees.
I think you've mentioned this before, that you sort of envision, particularly with this line, that the fighting style for these guys would be significantly different from how the elves would work, right? That was...
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I only made the relatively small goblins, the archers, is because I figured that in their, you know, kind of psychology of their culture, shooting arrows at people would be a contemptible job for, you know, lesser goblins. Your big, strong goblins are going to want to get in there hand to hand and smash things. That'd be my view of it. You know.
Makes sense. And
but they're clumsy, very strong, but clumsy.
Gotcha. And then the Byzantines that you did with the 30 millimeter line,
Right.
I sort of assumed you had envisioned those as an analog to one of the types of men within Tolkien's works. Is there a specific one that they would best associate with?
Well, I think they could be anybody except for the ones who are described in much more detail. I mean, they could be any of the like the northern men of the northern kingdom, or even of the southern kingdom, or the guys around Minas Tirith, except of course for the knights of Dol Amroth. Is that the name of the place? Who were described as being like, you know, in full plate armor and that. You know.
Okay.
So they would be, although you could still do Byzantines in with a catapult horse that would, I guess, qualify as full plate armor. But I imagine them as being more like 13th century knights, like the one guy did. But,
Oh yeah, the one on foot. Was there ever plans to add more to him, or was he supposed to be more character-like?
well, I wanted to do men, but you know, when I was looking at them, I thought I should make them a little bit heftier. I made them a little too thin. So maybe one day I'll redo them all and make them a little chunkier. They came out a little too fine in the body. I want to make them look a little more robust than the elves. You know,
Yeah.
about the same height as the High Elves, but a little more muscular, a little broader in the shoulders, that kind of thing.
Okay. Understandable. And the Russ female, what was the thought behind her?
Oh, that was somebody asked me to do my vision of what Eowyn would look like.
Oh, okay.
So
That explains that post
She
she's in
looks
a
like
little
a
bit.
horse, yeah.
Okay. Would be with dwarves. Every once in a while I have somebody ask, are you guys going to do any female dwarves? And you have a very specific answer to that.
Well, apparently in Tolkien you couldn't tell them from the males, but you know.
So for all we know, they're all female.
I don't know. I guess the voice or something would give them away, but when they're traveling, they apparently stay home in seclusion all the time. But I mean, it would be kind of funny to do one and just very subtly make it look like she had a fake beard on. Do her features a little finer, you know, and a little thing, and do her slightly slighter, but you know, and then with her beard, just you know, make a hard line rather than making it look like it's growing out of her face. So she's disguised that she's moving from one place to another.
So were there any particular, like, the armor you've got on the dwarves, was there any specific historical source for that, or any artwork that was
Germanic.
Germanic?
I went for medieval German. It's quite different from the French or English armor of the 13th century or so, 12th and 13th century that we're used to seeing in illustrations or in films or something. The Germanic armor at the time was odd looking in lots of ways. It had these helmets with big round domes on top of them that went up really high and with a nasal. Used a lot of chainmail, but also put plates in the chainmail, almost like later the Mughals did the same thing. They'd have a mainly chain shirt, but then they'd have pieces of metal in spots where you were likely to get hit by an arrow that would have holes perforated in them and it would be tied into the chainmail, you know, that sort of thing.
The future of the 30 millimeter line. I know you had, in passing, jokingly mentioned that if this goes well, we might try halflings at some point or something like that. Are there any particular things you're thinking you do want to eventually get around to adding to the range?
I think the most, I don't know, I don't have any strong feelings about it. I'd like to do more men for it, really, more than anything else, and get the men right. You know, make them a little beefier and get them right. Unfortunately, that will involve making more horses, which I do not enjoy. But you know, I can make horses now. I can make nice horses, but I don't really enjoy making horses.
With men, were you thinking like, you know, Easterlings and Southrons and stuff? Or?
Just all different kinds of men. So it'll fit into the things. Maybe do some more of those medieval knight-looking guys.
Have you thought about doing something with Undead for the 30 millimeter line, or is that not something you're really interested in?
It isn't something I'm interested in, and frankly, I think that it's better for me to concentrate on things I do well, and that other people can't do, I think, very well. Most other people can't do very well. So things that are fine and sophisticated and require technical expertise, that's where I'm good. Giving something character, well, that's a matter of opinion whether you like one character or another, but lots of people can give things a nice character. And when you're talking about undead, they're what I call grotesques, and there's nothing particularly refined about them. There are lots of people who could do undead that most people would think were just great and, you know, at least as good or better than anything I could do. So why should I expend effort doing it?
Makes sense.
Reinventing the wheel.